4 lovers in one band, one marriage that lasted only 8 days, and a family secret so dark it shattered Hollywood's golden dream. Before the drugs, before the scandals, she was the face of California Dreamin. Michelle Phillips, the blonde angel who sang about paradise while living in hell. At just 21, she had everything: fame, beauty, and America at her feet. But behind the sunshine smile was betrayal, jealousy, and control. She slept beside a husband who made her a star and a prisoner. Then she fell for another man, the bandmate who sang next to them both. It wasn't a love story, it was a time bomb. When the mamas and the papas exploded, so did she. From the studio to the Sunset Strip, Michelle dove into a world of free love and chaos. Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Mick Jagger. She was the muse of every man and the villain of every headline. Her 8-day marriage to Dennis Hopper became legend. Her past with John Phillips turned to scandal. And decades later, when his daughter exposed the family's darkest secret, the world asked, did Michelle know? From the woman who defined the dream to the only one left to tell how it died. This is the untold story of Michelle Phillips, the last survivor of the California Dream, and the price she paid to stay alive in a world built on love, lies, and fame. Before the fame, before the fire, there was a little girl named Holly Michelle Gilliam. Born in Long Beach, California in 1944, she grew up chasing horizons she could never reach. Her father was a merchant seaman, always gone. Her mother, fragile, restless, often lost inside her own mind. By 10, Michelle had lived in 3 cities and 2 countries. Every time she unpacked her suitcase, it was time to leave again. She learned early that beauty was power and silence was safety. At 16, she modeled in Los Angeles, a golden girl surrounded by wolves in suits. That same year, she met John Phillips, charming, brilliant, 26, married. He called her the purest thing I've ever seen. She thought it was love. It was destiny. Within months, she became his muse, his wife, and his reflection. But in his world, love came with control. And for a girl who never truly belonged anywhere, the spotlight finally felt like home, even if it was burning her alive. Los Angeles, a city built on dreams and famous for killing them. In a small house in Laurel Canyon, 4 young artists were about to rewrite American music. John Phillips, the controlling genius. Cass Elliot, the soulful voice, trapped in a body the world mocked. Denny Doherty, the charming vagabond, with whiskey breath and a voice like velvet. And Michelle Phillips, the golden-haired muse who looked like she'd stepped out of a California postcard. Together, they became the Mamas and the Papas. Their sound, a haunting blend of folk and pop, light and melancholy, became the anthem of a generation. In 1966, California Dreamin hit the airwaves. Within weeks, it sold over 20 million copies worldwide and reached the top 5 on the Billboard charts. It was the sound of freedom. But behind those harmonies was heartbreak, addiction, and betrayal. On stage, they smiled, sang about sunshine and peace. Off stage, they tore each other apart. John was brilliant and cruel. He adored Michelle, molded her image, controlled her clothes, her voice, her every step. To the outside world, she was his muse. In private, she was his prisoner. Then came Denny Doherty, the one man John didn't own. They rehearsed late into the night, their eyes meeting longer than they should. Cass, who secretly loved Denny, watched in silence. And one night, after too much whiskey and too many secrets, Michelle and Denny crossed a line they could never uncross. When John found out, all hell broke loose. He fired Michelle in the middle of their world tour, the band at its peak, their faces on every magazine. The headlines were brutal. The prettiest girl in pop fired for love. Cass was heartbroken. Denny was shattered. And the dream California Dreamin began to die. A few months later, the record label forced them to reunite. They finished one more album together, The Papas and the Mamas, 1968. The songs were darker now, heavier, full of shadows. The sound of a paradise turning to ash. By 1969, it was over. The Mamas and the Papas gone, without a goodbye. John fell into heroin. Cass tried to reinvent herself, only to die in 1974 at 32. Denny disappeared into quiet obscurity. And Michelle, the angel of Laurel Canyon, stepped into the heart of Hollywood alone. She was still breathtaking, the cheekbones, the blonde hair, the smile that looked like summer. But the summer was gone. Hollywood in the 1,970 seconds was a wild circus of sex, drugs, and broken souls. And Michelle, once America's sweetheart, was now its most dangerous muse. In 1970, she married Dennis Hopper, the mad genius behind Easy Rider. Their marriage lasted 8 days. 8 days of drugs, screaming, and surreal love. Hopper later said, "It was the longest bad trip I ever had." Michelle laughed it off years later. "We were too beautiful, too high, and too crazy." Then came the Hollywood years: Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Mick Jagger, Roman Polanski. Every headline called her the muse of the Lost Boys. But fame without purpose is just another kind of prison. She wasn't chasing love anymore. She was running from silence. She tried to rebuild through acting. Dillinger, 1973. Valentino, 1977. Her very first role earned her a Golden Globe nomination, but critics wrote more about her looks than her talent. Every character she played, the broken wife, the doomed lover, felt like a mirror. She wasn't pretending, she was confessing. Then came the funerals. Cass Elliot, in 1974, heart failure. John Phillips, arrested in 1981 for drug trafficking. The dream was dead. By the mid-1980 seconds, only Michelle and Denny were still standing. In 1987, she joined the cast of Knots Landing, a primetime soap opera. For the first time, she wasn't just someone's muse, she was a professional actress, respected, independent. But every time someone recognized her, they didn't say, "You're Ann Matheson from TV." They said, "Aren't you the girl from the Mamas and the Papas?" The shadow of that dream followed her everywhere. When Cass died, Michelle said quietly, "It was like losing my voice." When John overdosed again, she didn't visit the hospital. When Denny died in 2007, she didn't attend the funeral. The 1,960 seconds had given them everything and taken everything back. For Michelle, fame was a curse wrapped in sunlight. People called her lucky because she survived. But survival wasn't victory. It was exile. A journalist once asked, "Do you regret anything?" Michelle paused for a long moment. "No," she said softly, "but I miss them all, even the pain." She smiled when she said it, but her eyes told a different story. The California dream had ended long ago. And Michelle Phillips, the only one still alive, was left to carry the ghosts of everyone who couldn't make it out. Because in Hollywood, the dream never really dies. It just changes faces. Fame fades quietly, but the ghosts it leaves behind, they never stop whispering. By the early 1,980 seconds, Michelle Phillips was 40, famous, and utterly alone. The California sun that once made her glow now felt like interrogation lights. The men were gone, the parties were over, and the city that once worshipped her barely remembered her name. For a while, she found peace in television. Knots Landing brought her back into America's living rooms, not as the naive blonde muse, but as Ann Matheson, a woman who had seen too much. It was a role she played too well, because it wasn't acting anymore. Behind the camera, she had grown weary of the same question every reporter asked. What was it like being part of the mamas and the papas? Michelle would smile and say something rehearsed. It was magical. We were young. It was another world. But the truth was far from magic. It was a lifetime of guilt stitched into melody. She was the only one still breathing. Cass Elliot dead at 32. John Phillips drowning in heroin and arrogance. Denny Doherty fading into obscurity, quietly broken. Michelle left to carry the story none of them could finish. When John was arrested in 1981 for drug trafficking, the headlines exploded. The mamas and the papa's papa in cocaine scandal. The photograph showed him gaunt, haunted, unrecognizable. When asked about her ex-husband, Michelle simply said, he was always chasing something he could never catch. Years later, when he released a tell-all memoir claiming affairs, addictions, and chaos, Michelle refused to comment. Hollywood called her elegant, mysterious, silent. But that silence, it wasn't poise. It was survival. Then came the 1,990 seconds, the decade of ghosts. Her past refused to stay buried. Biographers called, documentaries surfaced, and new generations rediscovered California Dreamin. For a moment, she smiled at the thought of immortality, until the dream turned on her again. In 2001, John Phillips died of liver failure, his body destroyed by years of drugs and alcohol. Michelle attended the funeral, standing quietly in the back. When reporters asked for comment, she said, "He was my first love and my biggest heartbreak." But the real storm was still sleeping, waiting to rise. It came 8 years later, 2009. A single interview on Oprah Winfrey's show would detonate one of the darkest scandals in Hollywood history. Mackenzie Phillips, John's daughter from another marriage, Michelle's former stepdaughter, sat on national television and said the words that froze the world. "I had a sexual relationship with my father." The nation gasped. Oprah went silent. And suddenly, every headline on earth screamed the same question. Did Michelle know? Reporters flooded her home in Los Angeles. Cameras parked outside her driveway. Everyone wanted a statement. The woman who once symbolized California's innocence was now the silent witness to its ugliest secret. When she finally spoke, it was to ABC News. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever heard. I had no idea. I was part of that madness, but I didn't see the monster. It was the truth, and also a confession. Because Michelle had lived inside John's shadow for years. She had seen the drugs, the manipulation, the control, but not the darkness that hid behind it. And that realization broke her. Hollywood feasted on the story. Tabloids called her the woman who slept beside a monster. Her image, once golden, now ghostly, appeared on every cover, her smile twisted by headlines she didn't write. She refused interviews for months. Friends said she barely left her home. She spent her days in silence, reading, gardening, and looking through old photographs she'd promised herself never to touch again. In one of them, 1966, Laurel Canyon, she, John, Cass, and Denny are laughing under the California sun. 4 young dreamers, unaware that they were building their own tragedy. She kept that picture by her bedside. She once said, "It's a reminder, dreams always look beautiful until you wake up." By now, all the people who had once shaped her world were gone. Cass, John, Denny, Dennis Hopper, all dead. Even the city had changed. Laurel Canyon's houses were bought by strangers, its wild nights replaced by silent gates. The dream had been sold to a new generation that didn't understand its cost. Michelle remained the last echo of a time that had burned too brightly. She tried to make peace with it. Occasionally, she appeared in documentaries Echo in the Canyon, 2018, reflecting on her youth with quiet sadness. "We were children playing with matches," she said. And eventually, everything caught fire. The world saw her as a survivor. But survival isn't the same as peace. She lived through every loss, every lie, every death. And in the end, that was her punishment to remember. There's a photograph from the 2010 seconds. Michelle, in her 70s, sitting by a window, sunlight falling across her face. She's smiling, but her eyes, the same eyes that once lit up every room, are tired. In that moment, you can see every ghost still standing behind her. The men, the music, the madness. Hollywood still calls her a legend. But she knows better. Legends are just survivors with better lighting. In an interview in 2020, she said something that silenced the room. People always talk about the 60s like it was freedom. But freedom without wisdom is just another kind of prison. That line, quiet, devastating, became her truth. Because Michelle Phillips, the last living member of the Mamas and the Papas, wasn't just a witness to the death of the California Dream. She was the proof that it was never real. When asked how she wanted to be remembered, she paused, smiled faintly, and said, "As someone who loved deeply, even when it hurt, and maybe as someone who finally stopped running." Then she looked away as if she could still hear the faint echo of 4 voices singing under the sun. All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. Fade out. The dream is over. But her story, her scars, still hum quietly beneath the California sky. Hey, say, every California sunset looks the same. But for Michelle Phillips, each one felt different because she had lived through them all. The blazing 1,960 seconds. The hollow 1,970 seconds. The haunted 1,980 seconds. The silent decades that followed. And now, in her twilight years, she was still here, the last dreamer still standing. By the 2000s, Michelle had stopped chasing headlines. She didn't need to. The world had changed, the industry had changed, and the kind of fame she once knew no longer existed. Her name would still surface from time to time in documentaries, retrospectives, or nostalgic articles about the Mamas and the Papas. But she no longer flinched when she heard those songs. They no longer hurt. They had become something else history. In 2018, she appeared in Echo in the Canyon, a documentary about the golden age of Laurel Canyon. Gray-haired, soft-spoken, and serene, she spoke like someone who had finally made peace with her ghosts. "We didn't know what we were building back then," she said. "We thought we were free. But freedom isn't easy. It comes with a price." That price had been everything: love, friends, innocence, and nearly her sanity. But she survived. Not because she was stronger, because she finally stopped running from the truth. For decades, Michelle had been defined by the men around her: John, Denny, Hopper, Nicholson, Beatty. But in the end, her story wasn't about them. It was about her. The girl who was never supposed to make it this far. The woman who lived long enough to see her past become legend. In the quiet of her Los Angeles home, she tends to her garden, writes occasionally, and still listens to old records. Sometimes, she hums along to California Dreamin' softly, like a secret she no longer has to hide. "That song used to break my heart," she once said. "Now it reminds me that I survived it." There's a kind of rebirth in that, not the kind that comes with applause, but the kind that comes with understanding. After all the chaos, the fame, the scandal, Michelle finally understood the one thing she had been searching for her entire life: peace. In a recent interview, when asked what advice she would give to her younger self, she smiled a small, wistful smile, the kind that carries both regret and gratitude. "I'd tell her to love herself more than the dream, because the dream doesn't love you back." That line has since been quoted in countless articles, simple, honest, devastatingly true. Because if the story of Michelle Phillips proves anything, it's that beauty fades, fame burns out, But awareness, the understanding of who you are after the storm, is eternal. She is 81 now. Still graceful. Still luminous. But different, grounded, wise, untouchable in a quieter way. She doesn't chase youth, or headlines, or ghosts. She simply exists as living proof that you can outlast the chaos without losing your soul. In the final shot of her story, the camera lingers on Michelle walking through her garden at sunset, the light wrapping around her like memory. She pauses, looks toward the horizon, and whispers to no one in particular. The dream never really died. It just grew up. Fade out. The music swells the soft echo of California Dreamin. And for the first time, after decades of loss, scandal, and silence, Michelle Phillips isn't running anymore. She's home.